The factory lights flickered above a row of humming machines in Taipei, the air thick with the smell of metal and oil. A teenage boy named Jensen Huang stood beside his uncle, watching the sparks dance as solder met circuit. The year was 1972. He was 9 years old, freshly arrived from Taiwan, and America was still a dream somewhere across the ocean. He didn't know it then, but the rhythm of those sparks, the slow pulse of creation, destruction, and invention, would one day become the soundtrack of his life. Jensen's journey began in the shadow of displacement. His parents, both teachers, wanted a better future for their son. They sent him to the United States, where he ended up in a rough Kentucky boarding school by mistake, a reform institution that confused his parents' good intentions. He shared rooms with troubled kids, washed dishes for pocket money, and learned his first lesson about survival. No one was coming to save you. You had to save yourself. Years later, that same grit would become the defining current of his empire. Jensen grew up with a fascination for how things worked: machines, cars, circuits, ideas. At Oregon State University, he studied electrical engineering, then went on to Stanford for his master's degree. Silicon Valley in the 1980s was still young, buzzing with possibility. After a stint at LSI Logic and AMD, Jensen began to see a pattern. The computer industry was growing faster than its imagination. Everyone was building for what existed. No one was building for what could exist. So in 1993, in a roadside Denny's diner in San Jose, Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Preem sketched an audacious plan on a napkin. The world was shifting from text to graphics, from spreadsheets to simulation. If they could build a chip powerful enough to handle that transformation, they could redefine computing itself. They called their company NVIDIA. The name came from invidia, the Latin word for envy, because who wouldn't envy the future they were about to build? But in those early days, envy was the least of their problems. Money was scarce, investors skeptical, and graphics chips were a niche market. Competitors like 3DFX and ATI already dominated gaming. But Jensen wasn't chasing games. He was chasing a vision of parallel computation, a way for thousands of processors to think simultaneously, mirroring the way neurons worked in the brain. He believed that someday, this architecture could make machines learn. The idea was so far ahead of its time that even his own engineers thought he was dreaming. But Jensen was relentless. He was known for 16-hour workdays, black leather jackets, and fiery speeches that could turn exhaustion into fuel. His charisma was part monk, part gladiator. He didn't manage people so much as ignite them. NVIDIA's first breakthrough came in 1999 with the GeForce 256, marketed as the world's first GPU, a term Jensen himself coined. It revolutionized graphics rendering, enabling 3D gaming and digital design to explode into mainstream culture. Overnight, NVIDIA became a powerhouse. But the real magic wasn't in pixels, it was in potential. As years passed, NVIDIA refined its chips, making them faster, smaller, smarter. And as it did, something remarkable began to happen. Researchers realized that the same GPUs built for gaming could also accelerate scientific computation. They could run complex algorithms thousands of times faster than CPUs. In labs and universities, a quiet revolution began. GPUs were being used to simulate galaxies, predict weather, and, most importantly, train neural networks. By the 2010s, artificial intelligence was no longer science fiction. It was a race. And Jensen Huang, with his ever-present smile and unyielding drive, was standing at the starting line holding the engine. When Google's DeepMind built AlphaGo, when Tesla trained its self-driving algorithms, when OpenAI began to teach machines to write and draw, the common denominator was NVIDIA's GPUs. The chips Jensen's team had designed for gamers had become the foundation of the modern AI world. He had built the shovels for the new gold rush. In interviews, Jensen rarely bragged. He talked about building platforms, not empires. But the numbers told their own story. Under his leadership, NVIDIA's valuation skyrocketed from a few billion to over $1 trillion. His personal fortune rose accordingly, placing him among the richest men alive. Yet he still wore the same leather jacket, the same humble grin, the same spark in his eyes that had glimmered in that Taipei workshop half a century earlier. Colleagues describe him as both visionary and exacting. He demands perfection not out of ego, but out of reverence for potential. Greatness, he often says, is a habit. He treats every product launch like a moon landing, every innovation as a moral duty. But beneath the discipline lies something softer, a deep belief that technology is, at its core, a human story. When asked what keeps him motivated after decades of success, he once said, "Because somewhere, a kid is dreaming. I want to give that kid the tools to build his dream." That belief shaped how NVIDIA evolved. Instead of building closed systems, Jensen invested in CUDA, a software platform that let researchers and developers harness the power of GPUs for any purpose. He built partnerships with universities, startups, and governments, arming the next generation of innovators. He understood that power hoarded dies, but power shared multiplies. By the mid-2020s, NVIDIA was more than a chip company. It was the nervous system of the AI era. Data centers pulsed with its processors. Autonomous cars relied on its vision systems. Artists generated worlds with its GPUs. Every great leap, from ChatGPT to medical breakthroughs, carried a trace of Jensen's legacy. Yet, for all the triumph, his journey was not without struggle. Supply chain crises, chip shortages, and geopolitical tensions tested the company's resilience. But adversity only sharpened him. He guided NVIDIA not just as a CEO, but as a craftsman, obsessed with precision, humility, and endurance. He often compared his work to blacksmithing. Innovation, he said, is like forging steel. You heat it, hammer it, shape it, and start again. It's not magic. It's patience. That philosophy became NVIDIA's culture: unyielding craftsmanship, relentless reinvention. When the world began to speak of AI as the new electricity, Jensen quietly smiled. Electricity had Edison, AI had engineers, dreamers, and coders, and NVIDIA gave them the current. He became, in the eyes of many, the blacksmith of the digital age, hammering silicon into engines of thought. But for all his power and wealth, Jensen remained curiously grounded. He still spoke warmly of his parents, of Taiwan, of the Kentucky school that taught him resilience. He still mentored young engineers. In board meetings, he still doodled circuit designs in his notebook. He saw life itself as an engineering problem, complex, iterative, full of unexpected loops, but also beautiful. One evening, speaking to a group of students, he reflected on the meaning of success. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought success was building something great. But now I know it's helping others build something greater." The room fell silent. For a moment, the billionaire and the students stood on equal ground, united by a simple truth: creation is the noblest act of all. As the 2030s approached, the legend of Jensen Huang continued to grow, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol: the immigrant who turned silicon into civilization, the engineer who taught the world that technology could dream. He often looked back on that napkin at Denny's, now preserved in a frame at NVIDIA headquarters. The ink had faded, but the idea had not. The company he built from scratch had become the backbone of a new epoch, one where machines could see, speak, and imagine. Standing before a crowd at a product launch, Jensen once paused mid-speech, looked at the shimmering display of AI-generated visuals behind him, and said softly, "We used to build tools to simulate the world. Now, we build tools that help the world imagine itself." The audience rose in applause, but Jensen didn't bask in it. He just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, the same one that had carried him through dishwashing jobs, startup struggles, and a trillion-dollar empire. Because he knew the truth. He had never really been chasing chips, or money, or power. He had been chasing that same spark he saw as a child, the fire that leaps between mind and matter, between dream and design, between what is and what could be. And in that fire, he had found not just success, but something far rarer: purpose,